Welcome to Tochi Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. Amaka's mornings began the same way every day, waking up before dawn in her mother's small, cracked-roofed apartment on the outskirts of the city. The mattress she shared with her younger brother was barely more than flattened foam, but she rose from it without complaint. Life hadn't given her much, but she refused to let bitterness take root. Her mother, once a seamstress before arthritis crippled her hands, depended on Amaka's meager income from the provision store where she worked. The air in their home was always heavy with survival, not despair, but endurance. Amaka would sweep the compound quietly, bathe using a small bowl of cold water, and make the long trek to her job, dodging potholes, reckless okadas, and the endless line of complaints that often accompanied her route. It was her routine, one that carried no glamour, but it was honest. She had long learned that kindness, not wealth, was her only luxury. The store was owned by Madame Ego, a woman known for her loud voice, sharp tongue, and endless thirst for profit. Customers came in daily, some polite, many rude, but Amaka greeted all of them with the same soft smile. When she first started the job, other workers had warned her that people would insult her, call her names, and even attempt to cheat her. "It's the uniform," one girl had said. "They think you're beneath them." And she was right. Amaka endured customers who tossed money at her like she was an animal, others who shouted because they were having a bad day, and those who would buy provisions and say, "Don't touch my change with your bare hands." But she remained gentle. When she could, she'd sneak sachets of water to thirsty street children or leftover bread to elderly beggars. It wasn't part of her job description, but it was part of who she was. Amaka didn't believe she was better than anyone, only that everyone deserved to be treated like a human being. Despite the stress, the noise, and the long hours under the sun, Amaka held on. Her kindness wasn't performative. It wasn't for claps or compliments. It was her truth. Even the other shop girls teased her for forming Mother Teresa, but she smiled and carried on. What they didn't understand was that Amaka had seen too much suffering in her short life to withhold compassion. She had seen her mother cry silently at night because the landlord threatened to evict them. She had seen her brother go to school barefoot because there was no money for slippers. She had tasted hunger so sharp it made her dizzy, yet even then, she had shared her last spoon of Gary with her neighbor. And so, behind the counter, every smile she gave, every gentle word she offered, wasn't just customer service, it was survival. It was her way of refusing to let life make her bitter. Amaka first noticed him on a Tuesday morning, standing awkwardly near the dusty window of the store, his eyes locked on the loaf of bread in the display case. He was a small boy, around 8, with messy hair and oversized clothes that hung on his thin frame like borrowed garments. His dark skin gleamed under the morning sun, but his face held no expression, just silence. He didn't speak, didn't ask, just stared. Amaka, used to seeing hungry children, reached for a half loaf of bread left over from the previous day, walked outside, and offered it to him. He didn't reach for it. He just looked at her with eyes that didn't focus, lost somewhere between this world and another. Gently, she placed the bread on the low cement wall beside him and returned to her counter. When she looked back a few minutes later, the bread was gone, and so was the boy. The days that followed, she began noticing him more frequently. Sometimes he would walk past the shop without stopping. Other times, he would stand for a while, observing the fruit basket or staring at the movement of the plastic fan inside. He never smiled, never spoke, and seemed almost afraid of touch. Other salesgirls called him strange. One even made a joke that he was possessed. But Amaka knew better. She had seen this kind of silence before. The boy was not rude or mad, he was different. On one occasion, she gave him a banana and tried to introduce herself. "My name is Amaka," she said, smiling and crouching to his eye level. He blinked, looked away, and then slowly took the fruit from her hand. It was a small victory, but it warmed her heart. She didn't know his name, where he came from, or who his parents were, but she knew hunger when she saw it, and she knew loneliness when it stood in front of her. She began setting aside small items for him: bread, biscuits, sachet water. She never expected thanks. She didn't mind if he never spoke. All she wanted was for him to know someone saw him, someone cared. Over time, she started noticing a change. When she approached, he no longer flinched. When she smiled, his lips would twitch, not quite a smile, but something close. He once touched the hem of her dress, held it for a few seconds, then let go and walked away. That night, Amaka couldn't sleep. She lay awake, wondering about the boy, his silence, his eyes. Who was he? Why was he always alone? Where was his mother? His father? She had no idea that the answers to those questions would one day change her life forever. In the dusty classroom of Kingsfield Primary School, Ikenna sat at the edge of the last row, fingers tapping rhythmically against his desk. He didn't make eye contact with anyone. He never answered questions. When the teacher called his name during attendance, he only stared blankly ahead, lips unmoving. The other pupils had long grown used to mocking him. They would mimic his stiff posture, his sudden claps, and the way he sometimes covered his ears when the bell rang. "Robot," one boy shouted during break. "Mad boy," another girl jeered. The laughter that followed was always cruel, always unprovoked. The teachers tried to silence the children at times, but it was clear they didn't understand him either. "That child needs help," one whispered to another. "Why bring him here when he should be in a special school?" The principal had written 3 letters asking the guardian to consider private therapy. None were answered. Ikenna's school life was a prison. He wasn't violent, wasn't a troublemaker. He just didn't know how to exist the way others wanted him to. He flinched at loud noises, recoiled from touch, and found comfort in routines no one understood. Each day, he would eat lunch alone under the mango tree behind the school, counting the leaves that fell or the ants that crawled by. Once, when another child tried to play with his toy car, Ikenna screamed so loudly the class thought someone had been stabbed. The boy had only touched the car, not knowing how much it meant to him. From that day, most children avoided him entirely. The teachers pitied him, but only in whispers. No one truly tried to enter his world. Until Amaka. Amaka didn't even know he attended the school near her shop. She only knew the boy who came for bread, the boy who stared at the fan, the boy who didn't speak, but always returned. But the Ikenna at school and the Ikenna with her were slowly becoming 2 different children. While school brought out his silence and fear, Amaka brought out something closer to joy: gentle humming, small hand claps, and tiny movements that suggested he was beginning to trust. Each time she saw him outside the store, she made the world softer for him. And while children and adults alike mocked him at school, the laughter behind his back never reached the ears of the one person who treated him like he was whole. Somewhere, deep inside a luxury car with tinted windows, his father watched all this unfold wordlessly, as the only person who had ever made Ikenna smile stood behind a provision counter, poor and barefoot, but rich in compassion. Inside a black-tinted Lexus parked diagonally across from the provision store, Chief Darlington sat in silence, his eyes locked on the girl with the warm smile and soft hands who had just offered his son a banana. From behind the wheel, his longtime driver, F, stole glances at the rearview mirror, wondering why his boss came to this location almost every afternoon. "Olga, should I drive now?" F asked cautiously. Darlington didn't answer immediately. His eyes remained focused on the interaction taking place at the storefront. No cameras, no pretenses, just one poor sales girl kneeling beside a boy everyone else overlooked. It wasn't the first time he had watched her do this. In fact, he had been following a pattern for weeks. The first time was accidental. He was driving home from a meeting when he spotted Ikenna walking alone, then stopping near a store to stare at food. He watched from a road as the girl stepped out and handed his son bread, then returned to her business without asking questions. That moment hadn't left him since. Darlington was a billionaire now, a man whose face graced magazine covers and who was invited to gala dinners he barely attended. He had wealth, connections, and an empire stretching across several industries. But all of it felt hollow when he returned home to a silent house, where Ikenna barely made sounds and avoided his father's touch. Therapists had come and gone. Nannies had walked out. Expensive schools had expelled him. Every solution he could afford had failed. His son didn't trust anyone, not even him. That was until Amaka. From the back seat of his car, Darlington had seen something he hadn't witnessed in years. Ikena smiling. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just a twitch of the lips, as the girl mimicked his clapping rhythm beside the fan. She had no idea who the boy was, and that was what stunned him most. She wasn't doing it for reward, status, or recognition. She was simply being kind. It wasn't something you could buy. It wasn't something you could fake. And he couldn't look away. Each day after that, Darlington made it a ritual to park near the shop after his board meetings or business site visits. He didn't say a word. He only watched. Watched the way she gently rubbed Ikena's head without forcing touch. Watched her wait for him to come closer before handing him food. Watched her sing softly under her breath, not for any crowd, not for show, but because she knew the boy liked the sound. One day, Ikena even clutched a bottle of water she gave him like it was treasure. Darlington nearly wept. How could a girl who had nothing give so much without being asked? In all his years chasing power, he had never met anyone like her. And though she had no clue, her kindness was reshaping not just his son, but his entire soul. Long before the riches, before the houses and bodyguards, before the name Chief Darlington meant anything in the corporate world, there had been only Darlie, a struggling mechanic with oil-stained shirts and calloused hands. He and his wife Adiz lived in a cramped, damp apartment in Onitsha, with dreams far bigger than their circumstances. They were young, hopeful, and in love, until life started demanding more than their love could afford. When Ikena was born, Darlington wept with joy. But as weeks turned to months, he noticed the baby never made eye contact. He didn't coo like other babies. He rarely responded to sound. Adiz brushed it off at first, blaming exhaustion. But by Ikena's second birthday, even she couldn't ignore the signs. The diagnosis came one stormy Tuesday: autism spectrum disorder, with severe communication delays. Darlington held his wife as she wept in the hospital corridor. But deep inside, he had already decided they would face it together. The trouble began when society's whispers grew louder. Adiz's friends mocked her, calling Ikena the mad child. Her family members pressured her to do something before the child ruins her life. One aunt even said, "You better give that boy to prayer warriors before it's too late." Slowly, Adiz began to withdraw. She no longer smiled when Ikena clapped excitedly at flashing lights. She no longer held his hand in public. She would scold Darlington for bringing the child to church or neighborhood parties. "People are laughing at me, Darlie," she'd say, tears in her eyes. "I didn't sign up for this." Darlington begged her to be patient. "It's not his fault. We'll get help," he would plead. But help needed money, and money was what they didn't have. She grew more distant, began sleeping in another room, and one day she simply packed her bags and left, with a note that read, "I'm tired. I deserve better." Darlington was broken, but not defeated. With Ikena strapped to his back, he worked 3 jobs: cleaner by night, mechanic by day, and security guard on weekends. He carried his son everywhere, even when people stared. He used his last savings to buy a second-hand tablet because someone told him visual stimulation helped autistic kids. And through it all, Ikena remained mostly silent, watching his father from corners, tapping his fingers, flinching at loud noises, but somehow surviving. Darlington never complained. He only cried when alone. His turning point came years later, when an old customer he had once helped without charge, Mr. Nduka, offered him a managerial role at a small logistics company. From there, Darlington rose like fire through dry grass, expanding operations, investing wisely, and eventually becoming a household name. But even as the wealth came, the ache remained, an ache no money could numb, the ache of raising a child the world refused to understand. While Darlington built an empire from nothing, Adiz found her own way up, through the arms of Chief Abedike, a retired military officer turned politician, with 3 wives and a mansion in Asakoro. Adiz had lied to him, said her husband had died in an accident and her baby didn't survive. She never mentioned autism, never mentioned Ikena. To her new circle, she was a graceful widow who had suffered and finally found peace. She wore pearls and lace, attended high society events, and lived the life she once dreamed of, far from the narrow corridors of her past. But she was always watching, always listening. And when Darlington's name began appearing on TV, in newspapers, and on business magazines, she froze. She thought he would remain in the gutter forever. She never expected him to rise, and definitely not like this. Her first instinct was denial. It must be a different Darlington, she told herself. But the more she looked, the clearer it became. The man smiling on the cover of City Tycoon Weekly was the same man she left holding their son. Panic began to brew. What if someone found out? What if Ikenna was alive and started speaking? Her carefully built lies could crumble. But even more pressing was something deeper, a twisted sense of loss. She had traded a man of substance for the illusion of stability. Chief Abadike was rich but cruel, unfaithful, and emotionally absent. She had servants, yes, but no joy. Jewelry but no peace. Fame but no love. Meanwhile, Darlington now had everything she once claimed he'd never achieve. It stung more than she could admit. Still, Adiz told herself she had done the right thing. I saved myself, she would say in the mirror, trying to believe it. I couldn't raise a child like that. But her reflection would blink back at her, hollow-eyed and silent. For years, she avoided the streets where Darlington once lived. She told people she had no surviving family. But deep inside, she wondered if Ikenna still rocked himself to sleep. If he remembered her scent. If he knew he'd been abandoned. And now, as Darlington's fame grew and whispers about his strange son began leaking through gossip blogs, she knew it was only a matter of time before her past knocked at her golden door. What she didn't know was that fate had already begun spinning its web. And soon, the child she'd left in shame would become the reason the world turned against her. The sun had barely risen when Amaka began her morning sweep, humming a gentle tune as she cleared dust from the shopfront. It was the kind of melody that lingered in the air, soft and hopeful, like someone trying to whisper joy into a weary world. She had just placed crates of biscuits and bottled drinks on display when she saw him again, standing by the mango tree across the road, arms folded tightly across his chest, watching her. Ikenna, the boy who never spoke. The boy whose silence had become familiar. Amaka's heart lifted at the sight of him. She didn't wave. She knew he didn't like sudden gestures. Instead, she gave him a smile and pointed to a plastic chair beside the shop. As usual, he didn't move immediately. He watched her carefully, eyes darting between her hands and her face, as if decoding her intentions. But eventually, as though drawn by something invisible, he approached. That morning, Amaka brought out something new, a handful of colorful biscuit wrappers she had saved from broken packets. She sat cross-legged beside him on the floor, not minding the dirt that smeared her skirt, and began folding them into tiny paper birds. "See this one," she said softly, showing him a clumsily folded creation. "Her name is Ngozi. She likes to fly to the moon." Ikenna watched without blinking. Then she handed one to him. For a moment, he didn't take it. But as she started folding another, he quietly reached for the bird and held it in both hands, studying it like it was a sacred object. Amaka's heart swelled with something that felt like magic. It was the first time she'd seen him engage so purposefully. She didn't speak much after that, just folded, handed him pieces, and watched as he mimicked her movements, slowly, hesitantly, but with growing curiosity. It wasn't much, but to her, it was everything. By noon, other customers arrived, and she returned to her counter, but not before placing a small bowl of chin-chin on the ledge beside him. Ikenna nibbled one piece, then two, then all. When Amaka glanced back hours later, he had arranged the paper birds into a neat line and was tapping his fingers gently beside them. And then came the smile, tiny, fleeting, but unmistakable. Amaka froze. He had never smiled before, not once. It wasn't wide or exaggerated, just a soft curve of the lips as he looked at her from the corner of his eye. She blinked back tears. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know what had shaped his silence. But she knew she had reached something inside him. What she didn't know was that someone else had seen the moment too, hidden behind tinted glass, a man clutching his steering wheel, tears streaking his face, silently mouthing the words, "Thank you." Inside his office that evening, Chief Darlington paced like a man possessed. His phone buzzed repeatedly with updates from his assistant, investors, and media requests, but he ignored them all. The only thing on his mind was Amaka. Her face, her patience, her gentle nature. She had done more for Ikenna in 2 weeks than all the trained professionals he had hired over the years. But he needed to know, was it real? Was her kindness just a mask? Darlington had seen too much betrayal to trust easily. In his world, people smiled with poison in their hearts. He had lost money, friends, and even sleep to people who only cared about what they could gain. He told his driver to arrange a test. Send someone she's never met. Offer her money for what she does for my son. Let's see her true color. The driver, nodded, though uneasily. But sir, she doesn't look like that type. Darlington's eyes narrowed. That's exactly why I must be sure. The next morning, a man in worn jeans and dusty shoes approached Amaka as she was arranging cartons of Indomie noodles. He wore a cap low over his face and carried a nylon bag filled with snacks. "Sister," he began, "I just want to say thank you for always feeding that boy. I know his father. He wants to bless you." He pulled out a wad of cash, thousands of naira bundled in rubber. "Take this. Buy something for yourself. You deserve it." Amaka blinked at the money, then looked away as if it offended her. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't do anything special." The man pressed again, trying to convince her, saying the boy's family was grateful and that she had changed his life. But Amaka remained firm. "If it's about the boy, I don't want anything. He's not a burden. He's a child, and hungry children should never be ignored." The man stood stunned, unsure of what to say. Eventually, he gave up and left. Inside the SUV down the street, Darlington sat in stunned silence as relayed the conversation. He leaned back in his seat, overwhelmed by something he hadn't felt in years: respect. Not admiration for power or fame, but reverence for something pure. This girl, who barely earned enough to feed herself, had rejected money without blinking. She wasn't kind because of pity. She wasn't generous because someone was watching. It was simply who she was. Darlington closed his eyes, the weight of years crashing over him. What kind of woman refuses money in this economy? He thought. And the answer came as tears welled in his eyes. A woman you marry. 2 days later, Darlington decided to meet her, but not as a billionaire. He left his expensive wristwatch on the dresser, changed into plain brown trousers, a faded polo shirt, and worn-out slippers. He didn't even let drive. Instead, he took a kiki to the street corner and walked the last few meters. He needed to see her up close, as a man, not a name. As he approached the shop, Amaka looked up from arranging sardine tins. Her first instinct was kindness, just like always. "Good afternoon, sir. You look thirsty. Please come and sit under the shade." Darlington was taken aback. She didn't recognize him. She wasn't faking. She offered him her seat while she stood and even brought him a cup of water. "Thank you," he said, unsure how else to speak. I know the boy you've been helping," he added. "His name is Ikenna." Amaka smiled, eyes lighting up. "He's a sweet boy," she replied. "Quiet, but I like him. I think he likes fans and music. I'm trying to learn how to talk to him." Darlington's heart swelled. She wasn't trying to fix his son. She was trying to understand him. "Are you his uncle?" she asked. Darlington hesitated. "Something like that," he said. They sat together for a while, talking about nothing and everything. He watched how she treated children that came to the shop, how she gave an old man free salt, how she split her bread with a barefoot boy. He felt like he was watching a rare flower bloom in a desert. Amaka never asked his name. She never probed into his life. All she said before he left was, "You're welcome to come by anytime. We don't have much, but we always have water to share." As Darlington walked away, something inside him shifted. For years, he had searched for meaning in contracts, accolades, and gold-plated gates. But in that moment, in a dusty corner of the city, with a girl wearing slippers and a heart made of light, he found something he thought he had lost forever: hope. He knew now that this girl was different. Not because of what she did, but because of who she was when no one was watching. As he turned the corner, he looked back at her one more time. She was laughing with a toddler who had dropped his biscuit. That laugh, it wasn't for show. It was her truth. And he swore, right then and there, that he would not just reward her. He would protect her, uplift her, and maybe, just maybe, love her. Darlington returned to the shop the next day in the same faded slippers and humble clothes. He had barely slept the night before, tossing and turning as Amaka's voice echoed in his mind, soft, firm, and full of truth. For the first time in years, he felt vulnerable, like a man seeing with new eyes. That afternoon, he came bearing a small nylon bag of snacks and a cold bottle of malt. He offered them casually, as one would offer a thank you. "Just a little something," he said. Amaka smiled and shook her head politely. "I appreciate the thought, sir. But you really don't need to." Darlington tried again. "Even if it's just to keep your energy up. You work long hours under the sun." She chuckled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "If God lets me see another day, that's enough gift for me." Her words hit him harder than she knew. Amaka wasn't trying to be righteous or superior. She simply meant every word she said. In a world where everyone wanted something, money, status, attention, this girl remained untouched by greed. Darlington observed how she handled her sales, refusing to cheat even when her boss wasn't around. A little girl with tattered slippers came begging for sugar, and Amaka gently poured some into a torn piece of paper without hesitation. "She comes every Thursday," she explained. "I think her parents are struggling." Darlington nodded slowly, watching her closely. "And what about you?" he asked. "Who takes care of you?" Amaka hesitated for a moment. "My mother is sick. My brother is still in school. But God has been faithful." She said it without bitterness, without asking for pity. That humility was foreign to a man like Darlington, who had seen people pretend to suffer just to enter his good books. Determined to do more, Darlington tried again later that week. He brought her a brand new handbag and a pair of decent shoes. "I noticed yours are wearing out," he said carefully. "Please take these. No strings attached." Amaka opened the bag, her fingers brushing against the shiny leather and delicate lining, then closed it again with a quiet sigh. "They're beautiful," she said, "but I already have shoes. They're not perfect, but they take me where I need to go." For a second, Darlington didn't know what to say. He had given millions to people who turned around and cursed him. But this girl wouldn't even take a pair of shoes. "You're different," he said at last, his voice quieter than he expected. Amaka smiled again. "I don't know if that's good or bad. I just try to be kind. That's all I have to give." What she didn't know was that, to the man sitting in front of her, that kindness was more valuable than all the diamonds in his vault. For years, Ikenna had spoken only in his mind. Words floated there, unformed, trapped behind invisible walls he couldn't explain. He had tried before, but they never came out right. When he was younger, he once screamed for hours when a nanny slapped his hand for not saying thank you. He wanted to say it. He just couldn't. Over time, he gave up trying. Silence became his companion, a shelter from a world that didn't understand him. But Amaka's voice had started chipping away at those walls. She never shouted. She never forced him. She simply spoke to him like he mattered. She clapped with him, sang songs, gave him colors to touch and food to hold. Each time she smiled at him, something shifted in his chest. He didn't know what it was until the day he saw her crying quietly behind the counter, wiping her face with a wrapper. That day he walked up to her, holding one of the paper birds she had made for him. She was startled by his presence and quickly wiped her tears. "Ah, my small Olga," she whispered with a tired smile. "I'm okay. Don't worry about me." He didn't move. He just stood there, looking at her like he wanted to reach through the silence. Something tightened in his throat, and he clutched the paper bird until it crumpled. "Amaka," he finally whispered. Amaka gasped. Her knees gave way, and she dropped beside him, staring in disbelief. Did you say my name?" Ikenna nodded slowly, his eyes unsure, but his lips pressed together like he was trying to keep the word safe. Amaka burst into tears, not of sorrow, but of joy. She hugged him carefully, aware of his sensitivity, but he didn't pull away. He let her hold him. Unbeknownst to both of them, Darlington had just arrived. He froze at the corner of the shop, clutching the doorframe like it was the only thing keeping him upright. He watched as his son, the son who hadn't spoken since he was a toddler, wrapped his arms around a girl and said a word. One word. One sacred name. Amaka. The name of the girl who had broken through where everyone else had failed. Darlington turned away quickly, tears burning his eyes. He walked back to his car, closed the door, and buried his face in his palms. He didn't want to interrupt the moment. He didn't want it to be about him. For once it was about his son. His son had found a voice, a connection, a miracle. And the woman who gave him that miracle didn't wear a lab coat or carry a medical degree. She wore faded skirts, sold bread, and had a heart bigger than the sky. 2 weeks later, Darlington could no longer keep the truth from her. He had wrestled with it long enough, torn between fear and conviction, between preserving a quiet bond and offering her the life she deserved. That morning, he didn't arrive in slippers. He arrived in his full glory, dark Italian suit, polished shoes, convoy of black SUVs lined like shadows on the dusty road. The neighborhood stood still. Shop owners came out. Children pointed. "Who is this man?" they whispered. Amaka stood at her usual spot, puzzled by the scene until she saw him emerge from the back seat. Her jaw dropped. "Sir?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, gently, nervously. "My name is Chief Darlington Obasai," he said. "Ikenna is my son, and I've come to thank you for saving him when the world gave up." The earth could have swallowed her, and she wouldn't have noticed. Amaka stood frozen, her heart racing, her hands trembling. She remembered every interaction, how she'd offered him water, called him uncle, treated him like an ordinary man. He had been the one watching her, the one protecting from afar. I didn't know," she stammered. "I swear I didn't do any of this for anything." Darlington raised his hand gently. "I know. That's what makes you different. You did it from your heart. And that's why I'm standing here." He signaled, and from the second car, Ikenna stepped out, wearing a clean shirt, holding a small paper bird in his hand. He ran straight to Amaka and hugged her. She melted into his arms, tears running freely now, not caring who was watching. It wasn't about wealth or reputation. It was about the boy, the connection, the truth. Darlington waited until the crowd slowly dispersed, then handed her an envelope. "Inside is an offer. A new apartment, a scholarship for your brother, and a monthly salary, whether you work or not. But this is not charity. It's gratitude." Amaka looked down at the envelope and then back at him. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Darlington replied. "Just don't ever stop being who you are." As he walked back to his car, Amaka sat down on the same wooden stool she had used for years. Everything had changed, yet somehow her heart remained the same. What she didn't know was that this was only the beginning. The kindness she had given in quiet places was now rippling across destinies, and fate had only just begun to return the favor. Amaka couldn't sleep that night. The envelope Darlington gave her sat untouched beside her worn-out pillow. She had opened it earlier in private, her hands shaking as she saw documents with titles like apartment lease agreement, monthly allowance structure, and private school admission letter for Chinedu Agwike, her younger brother. There was also a bank draft worth more than anything she had ever seen in her life. She had stared at it like it was a mirage. For a few moments, she allowed herself to imagine a different life. Her mother in a hospital bed with proper treatment, her brother in shoes that didn't flap when he walked, a home where the roof didn't leak during rain. But then, her heart grew heavy. She hadn't helped Ikenna because she wanted reward. She had done it because it was right. Accepting all this felt uncomfortable, like putting a price on compassion. As dawn broke, she rose from bed, tied her scarf, and made her decision. The next day, she arrived at Darlington's residence, escorted by one of his drivers. The mansion was sprawling and intimidating, with security men and maids at every turn. Amaka stepped in timidly, holding the envelope like it might explode. She was led into a lounge where Darlington awaited her, seated beside Ikenna, who clutched a stuffed toy she had once given him. "You didn't have to come in person," he said warmly. "I hope you've had time to consider the offer." Amaka sat down slowly and pushed the envelope across the table. "Sir, I'm truly grateful. I'm overwhelmed, honestly. But I can't take all this." Darlington furrowed his brow. "Why?" She lowered her gaze. "Because kindness is not a transaction. If I take this, it feels like I was paid for being human. And I wasn't. I only wanted him to smile." Her voice cracked with sincerity. That smile was enough. There was a long silence. Even the ticking of the clock felt loud. Darlington stared at her, trying to comprehend the depth of what she had just said. This was a girl who lived in poverty, whose life could change instantly with one signature. And yet she sat here returning wealth most people would kill for. "You've given me something no one else ever has," he said finally. "You've reminded me what real love looks like. The world lost that a long time ago." Amaka smiled faintly. "You've already repaid me, sir. Ikenna now speaks. That's more than gold." She stood up and turned to leave, her shoulders strong, her heart light. As she stepped outside, the guard stood and greeted her respectfully, not because she had money, but because they had overheard. In a house built on fortune, Amaka had just proven herself to be the richest soul of all. By the end of the week, news had spread across the neighborhood that Amaka had been visited by a billionaire in black SUVs. Word twisted faster than the wind, exaggerated, inflated, and poisoned by jealousy. She must have slept with him, some whispered. That's how she caught a rich man's attention. Pretending to be holy, others added. Even the local women who used to borrow sachets of salt from her suddenly treated her with suspicion. The other shop girls grew cold, snickering behind her back. One even hissed at her in public, "Madam Millionaire, why are you still walking like a church rat?" The very people who once praised her humility now accused her of deception. It was like watching a community flip its face overnight. Amaka tried to ignore them, but their words dug deep, each one leaving tiny invisible scars. Things worsened when her boss, Madam Ego, called her into the store office. "You're becoming too popular," she sneered. "People are saying I'm harboring a runs girl." Amaka's mouth fell open. "Ma, I would never. Save it." Madam Ego snapped. "Since you're now rolling with big men, go and open your own shop. You think I don't know what you're doing?" With that, she threw a nylon bag of Amaka's belongings on the floor and shouted, "Out! Before you spoil my business." Amaka stood there, frozen, watching her world collapse. She had no savings, no backup plan. Just like that, she was unemployed. She picked up her things with trembling hands and walked out of the shop she had served for 3 years without a single day of late arrival. Not even the customers she had once helped spoke in her defense. That evening, she sat outside her mother's compound, fighting back tears. Her brother came and sat beside her, holding her hand. "We know who you are," he whispered. "Let them say what they want." But it wasn't just the words. It was the betrayal. The same people who had once relied on her generosity now treated her like a criminal. The weight of rejection pressed down on her chest. But through it all, she didn't reach out to Darlington. She didn't call or ask for help. Pride. Maybe. Or perhaps it was her resolve to not let the world turn her kindness into currency. She would find another way. She would rise again, not through wealth, but through faith. And though her heart ached somewhere deep inside, she believed the same hand that led her to Ikenna would make a path where there was none. 2 days passed before Darlington showed up again, this time without guards or cars. Just a single Kiki dropped him off near the alley that led to Amaka's compound. He walked slowly, carrying a small food flask and a bottle of malt. He found her seated beneath a mango tree, barefoot, braiding her brother's hair with slow fingers. The moment she saw him, she stood, confused and unsure. I thought you were done with me," she said softly. Darlington approached with gentle eyes. "I came to say thank you." She furrowed her brow. "For what?" "For not becoming someone else, even when it was easier to," he said. He handed her the food flask. I asked your brother what your favorite meal was. He said beans and ripe plantain. She couldn't help but smile. They sat together for hours, talking like old friends. Darlington told her about his past, his rise, his wounds. He told her about Adiz, how she left when he had nothing, how she denied their son, how he struggled alone. Amaka listened in silence, her heart breaking for the boy and the man. I wasn't looking for anyone, he confessed. I've seen too much of the world's wickedness. But then I met you. She looked away, unsure how to respond. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a tiny box, not a diamond ring, but a small hand-carved necklace made of wood. This isn't gold, he said. It's not worth millions. But I made it myself. For you. She stared at it, tears welling. Why me, she whispered. Because you're the only person who ever gave my son what he needed, love. Amaka didn't say yes. Not yet. Her heart was too full of wounds. But she didn't say no either. She held the necklace close to her chest and nodded. I'll wear it, she said. But not because you're rich. Because you see me. Darlington smiled, a rare, peaceful smile. That's all I ever wanted. As they sat in silence, Ikena stepped out of the kiki that had arrived moments later. He ran toward them and sat beside Amaka, resting his head on her lap. The street was quiet. No cameras. No reporters. Just three souls bruised but whole, beginning something new, not built on power or pity, but on something the world often forgets. Quiet, patient love. The announcement of Darlington's engagement, though not yet public, leaked through whispers from the household staff and quickly reached social media. Photos of Amaka walking beside Darlington and holding Ikena's hand surfaced online, taken discreetly by a neighbor's teenage daughter. Within hours, the pictures spread like wildfire. The billionaire and the salesgirl, the captions read. The public was divided. Some praised Darlington for choosing a real woman over the city's elite, while others mocked Amaka, accusing her of manipulation and witchcraft. But amidst the chaos, one particular woman sat in stunned silence in a marble kitchen in Asakoro, watching the footage with trembling hands. Adiz, the woman who once walked away. The same woman who told the world her son had died. The moment she saw Darlington's face beside Amaka's, the glass in her hand fell to the floor and shattered. Panic twisted through her like a knife. For years, she had buried her past under designer gowns and political dinners. She never imagined that the man she abandoned, broke barefoot and holding an autistic child, would become a national symbol of resilience and wealth. And worse, that the child she left behind would now be the center of attention. As more videos emerged showing Ikena smiling, laughing, and even speaking around Amaka, Adiz's stomach turned. The world didn't know she was the boy's mother. But how long would that secret hold? She began calculating. If she could act fast, perhaps she could control the narrative. She called her stylist, packed her bags, and arranged for an immediate flight back to the city. Her plan was simple. Reclaim her place before it slipped forever beyond her reach. It didn't matter that she had walked away. The world needed to see her with them. Now. When she arrived at Darlington's estate, the guards hesitated. She wore sunglasses, a designer bag, and a false sense of dignity. Tell him Adiz is here, she instructed coldly. Moments later, the door opened. Darlington stood in the doorway, Ikena beside him, still holding a toy giraffe Amaka gave him. The sight of her ex-husband, taller, stronger, more confident than she remembered, made her heart skip. Darlington, she said, removing her glasses. I saw the news. I wanted to see my son. There was silence. Ikena looked up at her, confused. He tilted his head slightly, then hid behind his father. Adiz crouched, arms open. It's me, sweetheart. I'm your mummy. But the boy didn't move, didn't smile. He didn't recognize her. Darlington's voice came low and heavy. You lost that title the day you left him. Adiz's eyes welled up. I was scared, darling. I didn't know what to do. No, he interrupted. You knew. You just didn't want a child who needed love more than appearances. Behind him, Amaka emerged quietly, holding a bowl of fruit. Their eyes met. No words were spoken, but in that single moment, Adiz knew she had already lost. Adi's desperation soon turned to bitterness. She met with her lawyer, fueled by wounded pride and the need to reclaim her narrative. "I want full custody of Ikenna," she snapped. The lawyer blinked. "Ma, that might not be advisable." "Do it," she hissed. "I gave birth to him. I have rights." Within days, papers were served. The lawsuit made headlines. Yek's wife returns to claim Autistic Son from Billionaire. The internet exploded with opinions. Some supported her, citing maternal rights. Others called her shameless and unworthy. Darlington remained composed. He didn't respond publicly, but behind closed doors, he prepared thoroughly. He hired the best child rights attorney, gathered testimonies from teachers, doctors, and staff who had seen Ikenna's progress since Amaka entered his life. But more than that, he prepared emotionally for the day he would have to face the woman who once left him for dead. The courtroom was full the day the case was heard. Darlington sat beside Amaka and Ikenna, who clutched her hand tightly. Across the room, Adiz wore a long, flowing gown and spoke in carefully measured tones, painting herself as a mother in grief who had been misled and abandoned. "I only left because I thought my child would be better off," she said, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I was young. I was scared." Her lawyer brought out pictures of Ikenna as a baby, letters of birth, and framed the case as a mother reconnecting with her blood. But then Darlington's lawyer stood. Calmly, she pulled out printed emails Adiz had sent years ago, messages mocking Darlington, calling Ikenna a curse, even suggesting she'd be better off if the child never existed. The courtroom went silent. Adiz's face fell. She hadn't known those emails had been saved. Witness after witness testified about how Ikenna was nonverbal and violent before Amaka came into his life. Now he could speak, smile, and even attend school with less fear. The final blow came when Ikenna, nervous but determined, was brought to the stand. The judge asked, "Do you know this woman?" pointing to Adiz. Ikenna looked at her for a long time, then shook his head. The judge leaned closer. "Do you know this other woman?" pointing to Amaka. Ikenna nodded quickly. "Mama Amaka," he whispered. The courtroom gasped. Amaka broke down in tears, unable to believe what she heard. The judge wiped her glasses and gave a ruling. This child's well-being outweighs biology. Custody remains with the father. "And as for you," she said to Adiz, "this court advises you to reflect deeply before returning here again." As the gavel struck, Adiz stood in silence, her world crumbling around her. The courtroom had become her courtroom of regret. Darlington and Amaka decided to go ahead with the wedding, quietly, humbly, and without public spectacle. They knew the media would try to spin the story, but they didn't care. Amaka didn't want a lavish ceremony, just a peaceful one surrounded by love. Invitations were sent to close friends, old teachers, street vendors, and neighbors who once shared meals during hard times. But when the day came, many of the elites who once dined with Darlington refused to show up. "You're marrying a girl who sold Gary on the roadside," one CEO muttered behind closed doors. Another claimed, "This will stain your brand." Some friends even advised him to postpone the wedding and reconsider. But Darlington didn't flinch. He stood at the front of the small church, dressed in a simple white agbada, his hands calm, his heart full. The pews at the front were half empty, but the back was overflowing with the people who truly mattered. The children who once received bread from Amaka. The widows she helped with sachets of rice. The beggar whose foot she once washed. The crippled man she always gave leftovers. They came in numbers, barefoot, wearing threadbare clothes, but filled with joy. They clapped, sang, and cheered louder than any orchestra could. Amaka walked down the aisle in a simple cream-colored gown, sewn by hand by one of her mother's friends. No makeup artists, no camera drones, just the sound of love echoing through the chapel walls. And when she reached the altar, Ikenna ran forward, holding her hand, giving her away with a wide, innocent grin. The pastor paused and asked if the couple had personal vows. Darlington turned to her, his voice steady. "You showed me light when I was surrounded by shadows. You loved my son when the world called him broken. And today, I promise to spend the rest of my life honoring your heart." Amaka trembled, her voice thick with tears. "I didn't know love could find me in a dusty store behind a counter. But you and you gave me something greater than any gift, belonging." As they kissed, the children in the audience shouted and clapped. No elite presence, no flashing lights, just two souls who had found each other in life's trenches. Outside, the skies threatened rain, but never poured. Instead, a calm breeze swept through the compound. It was as though heaven had decided to whisper its approval, not through thunderous applause, but in the silence of hearts finally at peace. The reception was held in the compound behind Darlington's home, not the grand hotel his advisors suggested. Amaka wanted something simple, something close to the soil where her story had grown. A large canopy covered the courtyard, decorated not with imported roses or chandeliers, but with colorful local fabrics, balloons shaped by school children, and strings of twinkling lights borrowed from a nearby church. Food was served on metal plates, and music came from a DJ who used to play at Amaka's old shop corner. People ate jollof rice with their fingers, children ran around with balloons, and the air was thick with laughter. Amaka looked around and saw faces of those who had walked with her through poverty, neighbors, beggars, the woman who once gave her leftover soup, and even Madame Ego's apprentice, who came quietly, without invitation. Darlington gave a short speech, not to impress, but to give thanks. He didn't speak of companies or contracts. He spoke of Ikenna. "There was a time," he said, "when I thought my son would never smile again. I tried everything, money, therapy, medicine. But what he needed wasn't any of those. He needed kindness. And God gave him Amaka." The crowd clapped. Amaka's mother cried silently, squeezing her daughter's hand. Then, to everyone's surprise, Darlington stepped down and picked up Ikenna, placing him gently in front of the microphone. The crowd grew silent. Ikenna looked at the mic, blinking, clutching the paper bird from long ago in one hand and a drawing in the other. He turned to Amaka and pointed. "Mama." "Amaka," he said clearly. The entire crowd gasped, then burst into tears and applause. It was his first full sentence spoken in public. Darlington's hands covered his face, overcome by emotion. Amaka dropped to her knees, sobbing with joy. "That's my son," Darlington whispered. "That's my miracle." Ikenna stepped down and walked toward Amaka, holding the drawing. 3 stick figures. One tall man, one smiling woman, and a little boy in the middle. Underneath, in childlike handwriting, it read, "My family." The image broke every heart in the room. No one noticed the cameras from small local blogs capturing the moment. No one cared about the wealthy elites who weren't there. All that mattered was that Ikenna had spoken, not forced, not bribed, but freely, and to the woman who earned his trust through nothing but love. It was a moment that validated every hardship, every insult, every night Amaka had cried in silence. And from that day forward, the world no longer saw Ikenna as the autistic billionaire son. He was simply Ikenna, a boy who found his voice through kindness. Months passed and life began to bloom again, but this time with deeper roots. Amaka never tried to wear the image of a billionaire's wife. She still swept her compound early in the morning, still gave money to street kids, still went to the same church with her mother, and wore the same style of wrapper she'd always worn. But the world around her had changed. Wherever she went, people now stood when she entered, not out of fear or formality, but out of reverence for the woman who had changed a boy's life without asking for anything. Journalists begged for interviews, but she refused. "There's nothing to explain," she always said. He was hungry. I had food. In a world obsessed with cameras and praise, she remained a whisper, a quiet force that touched lives, then stepped back into the shadows. Darlington built a new wing in his company, not in Amaka's name, but in Ikenna's. It wasn't a charity foundation. There were no summits or conferences. It was a training center for caregivers of special needs children, especially for those in poor communities where help was almost non-existent. Amaka insisted on visiting the center regularly, not as a boss, but as a listener. She shared her experience, her fears, her failures. And through it all, Ikena continued to grow. He attended a modest school with personalized learning, had 2 real friends, and began drawing more. Amaka kept every drawing in a large box under their bed, each one a testament to a healing heart. Some nights, Darlington would lie beside her, watching her silently trace the lines of each sketch. "We're not rich because of money," he once said. "We're rich because we found each other." One evening years later, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops of the city, Amaka sat with Ikena in the backyard. He was older now, taller, more expressive. "Do you remember when we met?" she asked him gently. He nodded. "You had chin-chin," he replied, grinning. They both laughed. In that laughter was the full arc of a story that began with a simple act, bread offered by a sales girl to a silent child. She had no idea a billionaire was watching. She had no plan, no motive, just compassion. And through that compassion, she had rewritten destinies. In a world that measures greatness by wealth and power, Amaka had proven a different truth. Sometimes the greatest wealth is the heart that gives without expecting. And as the night sky swallowed the last trace of sunlight, the stars above seemed to whisper the name of the story she had written with her life, the kindness that found a billionaire. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel Tochi Stories for more.